Hello and welcome to Disastrous History. Today we're going to talk about one of the most infamous wildland firefighting incidents in American history, arguably one of the most infamous firefighting incidents in American history, the loss of the Granite Mountain Hotshots on June 30th, 2013 during the Yarnell Hill Fire in Arizona. Now, the Granite Mountain Hotshots were a hotshot crew that was special and unlike any other. The reason being is that most hotshot crews are associated with federal or state authorities, usually a national forest or a state forest. The Granite Mountain Hotshots were not associated with a federal or state authority. They were the country's only hotshot team that was affiliated with a municipal fire department, specifically the Prescott, Arizona Municipal Fire Department. And as such, they were treated differently by other hotshot crews. They would show up to fires across the country and be told they couldn't work in certain areas, they couldn't do certain things along those lines. You know, the general ribbing of others that happens oftentimes in the fire service. Now, the Yarnell Hill Fire started on June 28th, 2013, from a dry lightning strike up in the Weaver Mountains just west of Yarnell, Arizona, and began relatively quietly. It was just a little bit of smoke, and they flew a helicopter over the area and only saw a light amount of flames, and they were not spreading significantly, so they decided to leave it until the next morning, June 29th, 2013, because 4 other wildfires had started throughout the Weaver Mountains that they needed to deal with. The morning of June 29th, 2013 comes, and the fire is spreading a little bit more, and the wind is picking up out of the southwest to the northeast and starts burning a little bit more, so they order in some very large air tankers and other water aircraft in order to drop some water and fire retardant on the fire and attempt to keep it in place, but are unsuccessful. By the evening of June 29th, 2013, the incident commander for the Yarnell Hill Fire, as it was then become known, decided that he needed to up the complexity of this fire and needed to bring in a new incident commander as well as 3 hotshot crews and significantly more resources. So, officially in the evening of June 29th, he called in those 3 hotshot crews and was rejected. One of them was given the Blue Ridge Hotshot crew as well as the Granite Mountain Hotshot crew. Both of those crews would arrive in the area the next morning, June 30th, 2013. The Granite Mountain Hotshot crew would arrive first at the Yarnell Hill Volunteer Fire Department, where they would have a briefing and receive their assignment. Their assignment at the time was to go up to the fire itself on the back side of it and start setting up an anchor point. And so what an anchor point is in a fire is a place that you can start a solid fire line from. So when wildfires are reported, there's usually 2 numbers that are associated with it. There's the containment and the acres burned. The acres burned is the total area the wildfire has burned at this point. The containment is how far around that fire crews have built a fire line. So essentially what that means is that if you have a fire burning in an area, if you have a 5-foot by 5-foot square box that is burning, if you have 25% of that particular fire contained, that means you have a line that runs 5 feet across one side of that fire. If you have 50% of it, then you have a line that runs 5 feet across and then it's longer than 5 feet, but you get the picture, 5 feet. That makes it 50%. If it's 3/4 of the way around, then it's 75%. If it's all the way around, it's 100% contained. 100% containment does not mean the fire is out. It just means that there is a fire line that goes all the way around it, that they have removed enough fuel that fire crews do not believe the fire will be able to jump. Their job was to go up on this ridge line in the morning, start an anchor point, and then begin building a fire line around it. Now, the morning started out fine for the Granite Mountain Hotshots. They got up to their spot, they started their anchor point, they were working on their fire line, and everything was going well through the morning. They worked until about noon and then sat down and ate lunch. At this time, the fire was moving mostly to the northeast in the direction of a town known as Peoples Valley. It's a relatively small town, but they were worried about structures burning the area and doing evacuation evacuations and making sure the fire didn't make it there. And at that point, the fire was burning in kind of a crescent shape up towards Peoples Valley. Now, after they ate lunch, the Granite Mountain Hotshots continued to work on their fire line, and they sent one of the firefighters down below to act as a lookout. At that time, he was setting up his lookout spot, making sure to pick trigger points of, if the fire gets to this location, I need to tell my team they need to move. If the fire gets to this location, I need to move, things like that. At around 2:15, the National Weather Service out of Flagstaff contacted the fire behavior analyst that was working the Yarnell Hill Fire and said, hey, there are some thunderstorms that are building north and northeast of you, and we are expecting an outflow boundary to move through the area and shift winds to the southwest from the northeast to the southwest at about 20 to 30 miles per hour with gusts up to 40 miles per hour. Now, this is a big change in this fire. That is a 180-degree wind shift. And as such, officials in the fire needed to make sure that all firefighters working the fire got that notification, because if you're working at the fire and you are back on the wind side of the fire away, so it should be blowing away from you, if all of a sudden it switches, now you're in front of the flaming front and you have a major problem. So they made sure that it went around. And everybody, including the Granite Mountain Hotshots, affirmed that they heard it, that they understood, and that they would deal with it when it happened. As they are continuing to work, the wind starts to shift around, and it begins to blow. Instead of from the southwest to the northeast, it is now blowing essentially from the west to the east, which has now made this fire, instead of burning towards Peoples Valley, it is now burning towards Yarnell proper. It is moving incredibly quickly. The lookout that was down on the ground looked at his notebook in front of him, looked at his crew that was up on the ridge in front of him, looked at the fire, looked back down at his notebook, looked at his crew, looked back at the fire, and it had already reached his trigger point, which was several hundred feet in front of him. So he realized, it's time for me to move, I have to go, and made it back to an area that he was safe. At this point, the 19 Granite Mountain Hotshots are sitting up on the ridge, and they have a fantastic view of this fire as it is making a run for Yarnell. In fact, several of the Granite Mountain Hotshots took pictures of the actual fire itself as it started to push towards the east instead of to the northeast. This is one of the pictures that they texted to one of their loved ones and said, the fire is burning towards Yarnell. The fire's on the left. You can see it right here. The fire, Yarnell's over here on the right, fire's on the left. It is burning quickly towards town. They had not yet started evacuations. Now, at this point, the Granite Mountain Hotshots are in the black. You can see right down here, you can see how this bush is black. It's charred. The area is all charred, all of this. There's a couple things that aren't burnt, but for the most part, this entire area is black. Now, the black in a wildfire is the area that is burned and is generally considered safe, because if it's burned once, it generally isn't going to burn again, or at least not burn well. And at this point, the fire is pushing towards Yarnell. They have nothing that they can do to help this town evacuate or protect structures. So they are attempting to get together to make a decision on what they're going to do next. And they contact command and say, hey, we're going to move to our safety zone. Command radios back and says, is anything all right? And they say, yeah, it's fine. We're just moving. Now, at 3:30 p.m., the National Weather Service Flagstaff had contacted the fire behavior analyst again and said, hey, the outflow boundary that we said was coming through earlier that was going to shift the winds to the southwest is actually going to shift the winds pretty much due south. And it's actually going to be wind gusts of 40 to 50 miles per hour versus the 30 to 40 we said earlier. Now, temperatures at this time are about 104 degrees and the relative humidity was down around 5 to 6%. So fuels were incredibly dry. It was incredibly hot. And fire behavior at this point with this added wind gust was going to be incredibly extreme. So what I mean by extreme fire behavior is that we're having flame heights that are, 50 to 100 feet high. It's very hot. It's burning at a very rapid pace, so fast that essentially if you are in front of this flaming front, you need to leave or you're going to get overrun. At this point, they had not yet evacuated the town of Yarnell. They had set up trigger points. One was a mile away from Yarnell that was if it hits this trigger point, we need to evacuate town. One that was about halfway between the edge of Yarnell and that first trigger point that was, okay, if it gets here, we need to evacuate firefighters. And then one that was right on the edge of town that was, if the fire gets here, everyone needs to be gone immediately. It hit that first trigger point, and then 15 minutes later, it was at the third trigger point. It took 15 minutes for the fire to travel 1 mile. Now, in that time, that was from about 3:40 to about 4 o'clock-ish in that general vicinity. It went from that first trigger point to in actual Yarnell starting to burn structures. In that time, the Granite Mountain Hotshots had gotten together and decided that they were going to move somewhere where they could at least believe that they were going to move somewhere to probably re-engage with the fire. Now, no one really knows exactly what the decision-making was for the Granite Mountain Hotshots. We only have snippets of radio conversation that say, hey, we're going to our safety point, and them asking, is there a problem? And them saying, no, we're just moving. And then them saying we're going to a ranch, an attempt to understand which ranch they're going to, and them saying, yeah, the one along the track that you drove up earlier, which wasn't helpful because both ranches, there was one in the black and one that was not in the black, that were along the same road, so that didn't really clear anything up until about 4:37. At 4:37 p.m., so the Granite Mountain Hotshots got up there, got to Yarnell at 7 a.m., they have lunch at noon. About 4 o'clock, the wind starts to shift and starts pushing the fire towards Yarnell. It's blowing almost directly out of the west or directly out of the northeast and is burning towards Yarnell. That was about the time that they sent this particular picture that you see right here. That's about the time this text message was sent to the family member of one of the hotshots. At around that time, they say, we're moving. They go to what command at the time believed was their safety zone in the actual black of the fire, but it was not. They were actually moving south of the fire to an area that they had seen when they were coming up that was essentially called a bomb-proof area of a ranch that had structures that were non-flammable. It had defensible zones. Basically, if they got there, they would be able to deploy if they needed to, or they could hide in the structures or anything like that. They wouldn't be overcome by fire. They had begun to move south to that safe point. Unfortunately, the wind shift out of the north to the south had not yet occurred. So at about 4 o'clock, they are somewhere in this general vicinity right here. This is the overview of the area where the fire was. They are somewhere in this general vicinity looking at the fire burning this direction towards town over here. It's burning this direction. They are south of the fire somewhere in the black, and they decide that they are going to go down this 2-lane track you can see right here, and then they are attempting to get to this ranch right here. You can see how there is a significant amount of defensible area here because the fire would be coming out of the north. So you have all of this open area where there is no flammable material. So the fire is not going to get that close to you. It might get hot, but it won't get that close to you. So they travel down this 2-track road right here. They get to this box canyon right here, and I'm going to show you what it looks like from the top of this canyon. We'll zoom in here on street map, and we'll turn around. So from this 2-track right here where they're walking, you can see here's the canyon right here. Here is the neighborhood of Glen Isla. Back over here is Yarnell. They are attempting to get to this canyon, and if you look right here, it looks like this ranch is incredibly close. It looks like if you just go down this hill right here, you're going to be at that ranch in no time. But this is actually 3,000 feet away, which is a little over 2/3 of a mile, 3/5 of a mile. They lost complete sight of the fire. Fire's on the back side of this ridge. They lost complete sight of the fire. Almost as soon as they dropped down into the canyon, the wind shift would complete and it would be coming from the north to the south, which meant that the fire was coming directly at them from over top this canyon. At 4:37 p.m., the Granite Mountain Hotshots radio over that they are in trouble. Essentially, they are in front of the flaming front. In the background, you can hear chainsaws going significantly. you can hear the panic start to set into the voices of the Granite Mountain Hotshots that are talking over the radio as they realize that they are in a bad spot. At 4:39 p.m., the Granite Mountain Hotshots make their last radio call and say, "We are in front of the flaming front. We are deploying shelters. I will call you once I get into the shelter." One of the flight crews radios back and asks them a question, and the last thing you hear from the superintendent of the Granite Mountain Hotshots is his yelling into the microphone, "Affirm." The fire would come over the top of the mountain, the top of the ridge right here, at 80 to 100 foot flame heights. It would burn, so you can kind of, not really, but kind of see the top of the ranch over here. The fire swung around the front of the opening of this box canyon and cut them off, and then came over the top of the ridge here, subjected them to 2,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. All 19 Granite Mountain Hotshots died in this fire, right in this location right here. The fire got so hot in this valley that there were several granite pieces that spalled and broke off in various locations. They were subjected to 2,000 degree Fahrenheit heat for a significant period of time. There were several hotshots whose fire shelters were almost completely gone. The silica doesn't burn away, but it becomes incredibly brittle. There were several that the silica was completely broken through. All of the aluminum layers were gone. All of the fiberglass were gone. Even the floor of the shelter itself had melted and burned away, which, being that it's flat on the ground, that would require a serious amount of heat energy to do. Many of the hotshots had all of their clothes burned away, and unfortunately, none of them would make it.
Yep, let's break out the whiteboard.
I'm going to describe what happened to the Granite Mountain Hotshots here on our whiteboard to give it a better understanding and visual of exactly what happened. So, at 7 a.m. on June 30th, 2013, the Hotshots arrived in Yarnell, Arizona, over here, at the volunteer fire station to get their assignment. Their assignment was to hike up to the heel of the fire, start an anchor point, and start building a hand line or a fire line, whatever you want to call it, around the edge of this fire to start containment. So they hiked up through the dry brush and sage and all of that in this area into the back portion of the fire right here, the heel. And they got there about 10 a.m., set up their anchor point, and began to build their hand line this direction. Everything was fine. They were doing their stuff. They were making their hand line. They'd go back over it to make sure it was solid. They got to this general-ish area about noon, sat down, had lunch, and then continued working along the extent of this fire to create this hand line to help build containment for this fire. Now, at this time, the fire, or the wind itself, was blowing in a northeasterly direction, was pushing this fire up to the northeast towards a town called Peoples Valley. It's a very small town, but toward Peoples Valley. That made this fire build like a crescent shape. You can kind of see the exterior of the fire right here. The red lines are the fire extent around 2 p.m. as it's beginning to push towards Peoples Valley. And that means that the majority of the work for this fire was going towards this head of the fire and structure protection in Peoples Valley, because they were worried we're going to lose this town, and they hadn't quite evacuated it yet. So at 2 p.m., the Granite Mountain Hotshots get their first NWS alert that the wind is going to shift from going from the southwest to the northeast, that it's going to shift. There's thunderstorms building up north of the actual fire itself, which north is this direction. I have my handy-dandy compass label right here. It's going to build thunderstorms up in this general area, push an outflow boundary that's going to switch the wind directions from the northeast to the southwest in this general direction at winds of about 25 to 30 miles per hour with gusts potentially up to 40 miles per hour. 30 miles per hour, gusts to 45-ish general vicinity. Now, looking at this, that helps with Peoples Valley, but your fire is extending this direction, and by this point, it's probably pushed out even a little bit further, more towards Peoples Valley, because the actual fire itself got very close to the edge of town, like nearly into town itself. So when this wind switch comes, all of this area is burnt already. So this portion right here is likely going to become your head where the hotshots are. And then this portion right here is going to push this direction as this wind shift happens. So that's at 2:30 or 2 o'clock. Excuse me. That's at 2 o'clock when the NWS alert comes in. Then about an hour and a half later, they get a second NWS alert. Instead of it coming from the northeast to the southwest, it's going to come directly from the north down to the south. So instead of this direction, it's going to be coming this direction. And instead of it being 25 to 30, it's going to be 30 to 40 with wind gusts up to 55. Now we have a problem because as this fire has extended this direction, it is going to start burning due south. As this wind shift comes in, it's going to push this fire due south through some brush that hasn't had a fire in 50 odd years. So all of this is incredibly dry. Arizona's in the middle of a drought. All of this is incredibly dry. It hasn't burned in years. There is going to be a ton of fuel available for this wildfire to begin to progress rapidly. Now, as this wind shift comes in, because it's 3:30 or so, as we hit about 3:45, the wind starts to move. And instead of switching automatically from southeast or southwest to northeast, it's going to swing around. Instead of an immediate shift, it's going to be a swing around to a different direction. So it's going to start like so. So it's going to start blowing. It's blowing this direction, and then it's blowing this direction, and then it's blowing this direction, and then it's blowing this direction. And when it gets to this direction, where it's blowing from the northwest to the southeast, it kind of stops there for a moment. And the Granite Mountain Hotshots themselves are still somewhere in this general vicinity. No one knows exactly where they are, right? But they are somewhere in this general, they're actually probably more somewhere in this general vicinity because at the time they were in the black, just nobody knew exactly where in the black they were. But they send photographs to their family members at around 4 o'clock saying this fire is making a run towards Yarnell. As this fire is rapidly burning this direction and expanding this direction, they have a great view of it burning quickly. Now, in Yarnell and Glen Isla, there are several structural protection groups that one of which has set trigger points for when they need to evacuate town, when they need to evacuate the firefighters, and then when it gets to this certain point, everyone needs to be out now or it's going to be the end of it. So the first trigger point was in this general area, about a mile away from town. That first trigger point was, hey, this is when we need to evacuate the town. The second trigger point was about halfway. That was when, hey, we need to evacuate all firefighters from the area. The third trigger point was literally the edge of town. That was when everyone needs to get out now or they're going to die. And from the point where it hit a mile away from town to hitting the edge of town took about 15 minutes. It took this fire, as it's burning this direction, 15 minutes to travel a mile, which is incredible speed for a wildfire. And also does not give you enough time to evacuate an entire town. Because remember, the first evacuation order is at this first trigger point. That is the first evacuation order for anyone in town. No one is leaving unless they do so on their own. No one is leaving until this first point. 15 minutes later, it is entering town. That's how quickly this fire moved. Now, at this point, the Granite Mountain Hotshots themselves are somewhere in this area. And over the radio, they can hear them discussing what they're going to do next. They don't know what they're going to do next, but what they're going to do next, because they know that this fire has effectively changed. Their job for the day can no longer be done because the entire situation for this particular wildfire has changed. They now have a town that has not been evacuated. They have a smaller town, subdivision really, that has also not been evacuated. All of these structures here are completely at risk. There is no defensible space in Yarnell. There is no defensible space in Glen Isla. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen. So at just after 4 o'clock, the Granite Mountain Hotshot superintendent, who was operating as Division A supervisor at the time, comes over the radio and says, hey, we are moving. Ops responds back and says, okay, is everything fine? And they say, yeah, we're just moving. We're going to our safety zone. We're just moving. They come back and say, fine. the superintendent for the Blue Ridge Hotshots comes over and says, "Where are you going? Are you going along the two track that you saw earlier?" And he says, "Yes, we're going to the ranch." Now, the problem was there was Boulder Spring Ranch, which was not actually called Boulder Springs Ranch. It was named by the fire department or the fire officials that did the investigation for a trail that led to the ranch. The actual owners of the ranch called it not much of a ranch. But we're going to call it Boulder Springs Ranch because that's what everybody refers to it as. So there's one here, and then there's one up in this general area that is in the black. It's already been burned past and will be an actual safe zone that's not in the risk of the fire. This one is also not a risk for a fire because the majority of it is stucco with metal roofs, and there's no shrubbery around it at all. It's literally just dirt. It was specifically built that way because the guy that lived there didn't want to have to deal with cutting grass or doing any yard work whatsoever, and he could just park all his stuff that he wanted and wouldn't have to deal with, overgrown things. So anyway, besides the point. So the Blue Ridge superintendent believes that the Granite Mountain Hotshots are going to this ranch that's in the black. It's along the same 2-track road because this ridge right here has a 2-track road that runs along it that's used for ATVs and stuff. It's along the same 2-track road. It's just in the black in safety. The Granite Mountain Hotshots are actually attempting to get to this ranch right here that has not been in the burn. It has not been threatened at all up to this point. Now, why are they going to this ranch instead of this ranch? Because this one is clearly safe. This one is also technically safe, but it has the potential to not be. You also have to go through a bunch of unburned fuel with a fire wind is rapidly shifting to directly south, where they will be directly in the path of this fire. No one really knows. I'll just come out right and say it. No one really knows what the thought process was going here versus going here. We have theories. I have my own theories. My own opinion is that they're sitting here watching this fire burn rapidly towards this town of Yarnell, towards the town of Glen Isla. They know neither of these places have been evacuated. They know that they're just going to sit here and watch this town burn. And they know that now there's not enough time to get everybody out. They're going to make the decision that allows them to disengage from this fire for the least amount of time, get to somewhere safe, and be close enough that they can re-engage and help with this situation right here. Because this right here is incredible. That is an incredibly fast movement of this fire. They are going from here to try to get to here, to try to get over here in order to help with the evacuation, help with protection of structures, help with protection of people. Because honestly, it's what firefighters do. And I have to be real honest, I don't really blame them for it. We obviously don't know for certain. That's just my personal opinion. That's my personal thoughts, having been around firefighters, having been a firefighter. That's what I think was happening here, was that they decided we can get over here and do the most good instead of going up here and then having to go all the way around to Yarnell. We can just go down here and go straight across. It would have been a long trek all the way down. And then going down this ridge would have also been a long trek because you got to go down, you got to go down here, then back up and across. That would have been significantly longer. This was the fastest from point A to point B where they wanted to go. So that's beside the point. As this fire is burning, the Granite Mountain Hotshots decide that they're going to move. And their route of movement is going to be to Boulder Springs Ranch right here. Now, as they are coming down, there is a box canyon right here. Now, if you don't know what a box canyon is, I'll draw one here real quick for you. So essentially, you have your ridge along the back, and then you have your canyon come down like this and back up like this. So this is your ridge right here. Your canyon comes down like this, and then it kind of comes out like a walkout basement. It comes out directly at you. If you're standing in front of it, you can see all the way up to the ridge, and there's long lines down either side. It kind of comes out like this. So they're coming down from up here. They leave the black. They come down along this 2-track, and then they come down into this box canyon here. Now, As they drop down into this box canyon, sometime between 4 and 4:30, no one knows exactly when because there's no radio communication, but sometime between 4 and 4:30, probably somewhere around 4:30-ish, most likely, they drop down in this box canyon. This is a very steep box canyon. And from the top of this ridge, the ranch here looks incredibly close. Like you could almost reach out and touch it. This whole area right here, incredibly thick with brush. Very difficult to hike, very difficult to get through. They are coming down through this, fighting their way through. As soon as they drop down into this canyon, the wind fully shifts to the south. It is blowing directly at them. The problem is the altitude in this canyon is about 80 feet lower than the actual ridge top of this canyon, which means as soon as they got down 20, 30 feet into this canyon, the entire wind profile changes. They cannot tell what the wind up here is doing. The wind down inside this canyon is going to be different because of the layout of the actual canyon itself is going to be different than the wind up above that's actually impacting the fire. In addition, as soon as they get down in this canyon, they can no longer see the fire. They cannot see anything that is going on here because they are down in this area. You've got a ridge here, they're down here. They cannot see what's going on. So as soon as they drop down in this canyon at 4:37, a fire retardant drop guide comes across the top. They come on the radio. Superintendent comes on the radio, says, "Yep, that's exactly where we want it. Drop it right there." Then 2 minutes later, he says, "We are trapped. We are directly in front of the flaming front. We are trapped. We are going to shelter." In the background, you can hear chainsaws going as they are trying to make themselves a deployment shelter. The Granite Mountain Hotshots made it about halfway through the canyon, give or take a little bit, before they had to deploy shelter. So what actually happened was as this wind shifted, blowing this fire to the south, it immediately burned like this. And it got to the top of this canyon ridge right here and was burning on top of this ridge. And then this fire burned right across the front of the canyon like that. And it trapped them in this canyon because at this point, their escape option was out the front of this canyon, but the fire blew across. So that's automatically out. You can immediately cut off that one. Can't go this way. Fire's burning the top of the ridge. Don't want to go this way because you just had to fight through that. There's no way you're getting back up it. The only way out is this one down here. And that is a really high ridge full of the same stuff you just tried to fight your way through this direction. Can't get out that way. And at this point, you have flame heights that are about 80 feet high. Your flames are moving about 19 yards every second. You are not getting out, basically. You cannot outrun a fire that fast. So their only option was to deploy fire shelters. Unfortunately, there were no areas to successfully deploy fire shelters in this area. Guidelines request about 20-foot clearance between you and the closest fuel source. There is very little chance that they got even close to 20 feet, especially if they're still running chainsaws as they're saying, "Hey, we're getting ready to deploy these shelters." So they're deployed these shelters. The fire temperature at the time that they would have been subjected to was over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for an extended period of time. One of the fire shelters themselves, so fire shelters are, let's see if I can draw this real quick. It's aluminum and then silica cloth and then aluminum. Those are laminated together. And then there's an air gap. And then it is aluminum, fiberglass cloth, aluminum. So what this does is the aluminum is supposed to reflect the radiant heat. The silica cloth helps to deflect any of the actual flame impingement that happens. Then you have another layer of aluminum cloth or aluminum sheet that will deflect any radiant heat that gets past that. And then you have an air gap. That air gap creates kind of a barrier for that radiant heat that helps to keep them separate. So if you have some kind of flame impingement on the exterior, you have the air gap there so it's not automatically going through this aluminum to this aluminum to the fiberglass sheet. And then you have that fiberglass sheet, which also helps a little bit with flame impingement. And then you have a last layer of aluminum to help with some radiant heat if it gets through those first 5 layers. To be honest with you, if it's gotten through the first 5 layers, you are probably already dead. Unfortunately, human tenability is about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Aluminum melts at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Silica cloth becomes brittle at 2000. Then you have a 1200, and then fiberglass is about 1600. It becomes brittle and starts to burn, and then 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. One of the Hotshots, their shelter, the entire aluminum on the outside was melted away, was completely gone. The silica cloth was completely brittle and had several holes in it. Next layer of aluminum was completely gone. Layer of aluminum was completely gone. Fiberglass was mostly gone. Layer of aluminum was completely gone. And then all of the clothes on their back completely burned away. To get silica cloth to be too brittle with holes completely gone requires sustained heat of 2000 degrees. It's not like it just hits 2000 degrees and then it's become brittle and breakable. It requires sustained 2000 degree temperatures. So they were exposed to 2000 degree temperatures for probably several minutes, if not 10 minutes or so. This ridge right here burned this canyon, burned incredibly well. They unfortunately had no shot. Now, the actual Boulder Springs Ranch ended up being a good shelter place. The fire swept over the top of the actual ranch itself. The fire literally burned over the top of the ranch. They are photos from the owners of, you can see the flames going over the top of their house as they hide inside. Unfortunately, though, the Hotshots were stuck in a position of rock in a hard place. It took several minutes. It didn't even take several minutes. It took an hour or so to actually find them, because when they called for help, the actual fire itself had created a pyrocumulonimbus cloud that started to produce rain. As that rain fell towards the ground, it evaporated. But the plane that was up in the air that was assisting with this fire was searching for them. It rained just enough at the altitude that plane was at that it mixed with the ash and covered their screen, so they really couldn't see to actually search. It took a while to actually find them, but even then they had to fly a helicopter in, drop a paramedic down, and they had to hike 500 yards up to the actual place where they were located at. Unfortunately, there weren't really any major lessons to be learned from this one. The biggest issue they had were radio communications. The big one was the air support module, the guy that controls, where they send tankers to, where they send fire crews to, all of that, was doing both all of that coordinating of all of those flights, as well as try and deal with his own plan of dropping water and fire retardant down on the fire. He was doing both. So one of the big things that came out of that was you can't have someone doing both, especially on a fire complex or a fire incident as complex as this one, because this ended up becoming a very complex fire that started out relatively calm, to be quite honest with you. When it first started on June 28th, it was a calm fire. It was a very small fire, and it very quickly and rapidly grew out of control, simply because they didn't really have any plan once this wind shift came. And on top of that, there were a lot of radio miscommunication. The Hotshots never really gave what their exact location was. They gave a series of statements that could be taken multiple ways. They said, we're going to our safety zone. They thought their safety zone was up here in the black. Their safety zone was actually down here. But this safety zone down here didn't end up being a safety zone because they had to go through a bunch of brush to actually get to their safety zone after this wind shift. No one knows if maybe the Hotshot superintendent thought that the wind shift to this direction was the wind shift that the National Weather Service had discussed, because we all experience sometimes forecasts aren't 100% perfect. So it's very possible that when the wind shifted to start blowing this direction, he thought that was the wind shift they were talking about. He didn't think that it was going to shift all the way south. But even then, dropping down into this canyon to make a beeline for this ranch takes you completely out of situational awareness. You lose complete control of what you're looking at in this fire. You can't see the fire itself. You can't feel the wind. You have no idea what's going on anywhere around the outside of this ridge, of this canyon right here. You cannot see anything. The only thing you can see is directly in front of you. And even that back here is blocked off because all of a sudden your fire is burning down in front of you and cuts off your only escape route. And at that point, you only have one escape route. And in wildland firefighting, only having one escape route is a bad thing. It's a bad plan. So yeah, that's pretty much what it was. They unfortunately dropped down in this canyon, lost sight of the fire. This wind shifted completely, and it burned directly in front of their escape route. And they really didn't have any other choice than try to deploy. And unfortunately, deployment is not a guaranteed. In the end, the outcome of the loss of the Granite Mountain Hotshots were that they needed to revisit how often hotshots went out. They needed to revisit training for hotshots, as well as they needed to deal with radio issues that came up during the actual disaster itself when they lost location of the hotshots, and to provide more accurate information in real time. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think.